The man known to history as Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863, in a modest farmhouse in Springwells Township, Michigan, during the final years of the American Civil War. His father, William Ford, was a farmer of Irish descent, and his mother, Mary Lydigot Ford, came from a large family of Belgian immigrants. Life on the Ford farm was simple but demanding, built on hard work, thrift, and self-reliance. From sunrise to sunset, the family labored in the fields, cared for animals, and maintained their land. The farm was both home and livelihood, and survival depended on the strength and determination of every family member. For a child like Henry, this environment instilled discipline, but also planted seeds of curiosity about how life could be made easier. The Ford homestead was surrounded by open fields, woodlots, and the winding Rouge River nearby. Seasons ruled every decision, planting in spring, tending crops in summer, harvesting in fall, and repairing equipment in winter. There were no shortcuts. Work was done by hand or with the aid of horses and oxen. Henry often joined his father in repairing wagons or sharpening plow blades, watching closely as tools were mended and adjusted. These moments fascinated him far more than planting seeds or milking cows. Even as a boy, he seemed drawn not to the repetitive cycle of farming, but to the challenge of fixing and improving the tools that made the work possible. Henry's early chores were varied but repetitive. He carried water from the well, gathered eggs, split firewood, and tended to the animals before and after school. The physical effort was constant, and while many farm boys accepted this as their fate, Henry felt a quiet restlessness. He began to imagine ways to make tasks faster and less exhausting. Though he lacked the knowledge to build such things, the desire to do so was already forming in his mind. Farming taught him the value of persistence, but it also showed him the limitations of muscle power alone. Life in Springwells Township was tight-knit, with neighbors often helping each other during harvests or emergencies. It was a place where traditions ran deep and change came slowly, if at all. Henry observed that while the farm families valued their way of life, they were also cautious about adopting anything new. He realized that if he ever wanted to introduce his ideas to the world, he would need to prove their worth in undeniable ways. This understanding would later shape his approach to designing affordable, practical machines. For young Henry, the farm was both a classroom and a cage. It gave him first-hand knowledge of physical labor, the mechanics of tools, and the discipline of hard work. But it also confined him to a life where days were predictable and innovation was rare. Deep down, he knew he was meant for something different. The open field stretched for miles, but Henry's eyes were already fixed on a world far beyond the horizon. One filled with gears, engines, and the promise of speed. In 1876, tragedy struck the Ford family when Mary Ford, Henry's beloved mother, died unexpectedly. She had been the heart of the household, keeping the family together through her warmth and steady guidance. For Henry, her loss was devastating. She had been the one who understood his curiosity, who encouraged his tinkering even when it meant losing a clock or kitchen tool to his experiments. Without her, the farmhouse felt emptier, colder, and the work of the farm seemed heavier than ever before. Her absence left a wound that would never fully heal. Mary's death forced Henry to take on more responsibilities around the farm. He helped his father manage the crops, care for the animals, and look after his younger siblings. This new burden made him stronger, but it also reinforced his desire to find a different life. Without his mother's encouragement, the daily grind of farm work felt more like a chain than a duty. Henry began to dream more seriously of leaving home, though he wasn't yet sure where the road would lead. In the months that followed, Henry often escaped into his workshop, a small shed where he kept tools, scrap metal, and bits of machinery he collected. Here, away from the fields, he found peace in taking things apart and putting them back together. He repaired broken tools for neighbors, gaining a reputation for being able to fix just about anything. Each successful repair gave him confidence and deepened his belief that his future lay with machines, not plows. Trips into nearby towns opened Henry's eyes to a faster, more connected world. He saw blacksmiths working with precision, carpenters crafting fine furniture, and merchants using new devices to weigh and measure goods. Compared to the isolation of the farm, these places were alive with movement and innovation. Every time he returned home, the farm felt smaller, its possibilities fewer. These glimpses of industry convinced Henry that he needed to follow his instincts and find work that challenged his mind. By his mid-teens, Henry's decision was made. He would leave the farm as soon as he could. His mother's passing had removed the strongest tie keeping him there, and his growing skill with tools gave him the confidence to seek a future in the city. It would be a bold move for a young man from rural Michigan, but Henry knew it was the only way to turn his mechanical dreams into reality. Henry's fascination with machines began early, nurtured by countless hours spent watching the village blacksmith at work. The forge was a place of heat, noise, and creation, where raw metal was shaped into useful tools. Henry was captivated by the transformation, how a lifeless lump of iron could become a sturdy horseshoe or a sharp plow blade. He studied every strike of the hammer, every hiss of steam, storing the knowledge away for future use. At home, Henry's mechanical curiosity often got him into trouble. He dismantled watches, clocks, and any small device he could find, eager to understand how each part worked together. His father sometimes grew impatient when items disappeared into Henry's workshop, but he also recognized his son's talent. More often than not, Henry returned the items in working order, sometimes improved. These experiments sharpened his problem-solving skills and taught him patience, two traits that would serve him for the rest of his life. One of Henry's most influential early experiences came when he first saw a portable steam engine powering a thresher during harvest season. The sight of a machine doing the work of many men left him in awe. It wasn't just the speed that impressed him, but the consistency and endurance. Unlike human labor, the machine never tired. That day, Henry began to imagine a world where such engines could power not just farm equipment, but vehicles capable of moving people and goods quickly over long distances. His passion for machinery grew alongside his skill. He began building small models using whatever materials he could find: bits of wood, metal scraps, and salvaged parts. Some of his creations failed, but each failure taught him something valuable. He learned how balance, power, and efficiency worked together. These lessons became part of his foundation as a self-taught engineer. By the time he was in his mid-teens, Henry knew that his destiny lay in working with machines. The farm had given him discipline, but it was the forge and the workshop that gave him purpose. He wanted to be where machines were built, tested, and improved. To get there, he would need to take the bold step of leaving home and venturing into the industrial heart of Detroit. In 1879, at the age of 16, Henry left the farm and set out for Detroit, a city just 10 miles away, but a world apart in opportunity. He carried with him little more than a change of clothes, some basic tools, and an unshakable determination to find work as a machinist. Detroit was alive with the sound of industry, steam whistles, the clang of metal, and the steady rumble of factory machinery. For Henry, it was both overwhelming and exhilarating. He found his first job as an apprentice at James F. Flower & Brothers, a small machine shop, where he learned the basics of metalwork. The hours were long, the pay was low, and the work was often dirty and exhausting. Yet Henry embraced it all, knowing that every day brought new skills and insights. He learned how to shape, drill, and assemble metal parts with precision, gaining a hands-on education that no classroom could match. Living in the city was a challenge. Henry rented a small room and often skipped meals to save money, but he was too focused on his work to complain. He spent his evenings reading about mechanical innovations and sketching ideas for machines he hoped to build someday. While other young men sought entertainment in the city's theaters or saloons, Henry was content in his workshop, experimenting with gears, wheels, and simple engines. The move to Detroit also expanded Henry's network. He met skilled tradesmen from across the country, each with their own stories and expertise. They taught him techniques, shared advice, and exposed him to the broader possibilities of mechanical engineering. For the first time, Henry saw a clear path from his apprenticeship to becoming a master machinist, and beyond that, perhaps even an inventor. By the end of his first year in Detroit, Henry had proven himself a capable and reliable worker. He was gaining a reputation for his attention to detail and his willingness to tackle difficult jobs. Though he missed the quiet of the countryside at times, he knew there was no going back. The farm was behind him, and the future, one filled with machines and innovation, lay ahead. In 1882, Henry returned briefly to the family farm, but not to resume farming. He began working for the Westinghouse Company, repairing and operating portable steam engines used to power farm equipment. This job combined his mechanical skill with his understanding of rural needs, making him an invaluable asset to the company. He traveled from farm to farm, diagnosing problems, replacing parts, and keeping the massive machines running smoothly. The work was challenging, but deeply satisfying. Henry loved the problem-solving aspect of repairing engines, figuring out why a machine had stopped working and bringing it back to life. He gained a deep understanding of how steam power worked, knowledge that would later influence his designs for gasoline engines. More importantly, he saw firsthand how machines could transform labor, making tasks faster and less physically demanding. During this time, Henry also continued experimenting in his spare hours. He built small gasoline engines from scratch, often using salvaged materials. His goal was to create a lighter, more efficient engine than the heavy steam machines he serviced for Westinghouse. The idea that an engine could power a self-propelled vehicle was beginning to take shape in his mind. Henry's reputation as a skilled steam engineer grew quickly. Farmers trusted him with their most expensive equipment, and he rarely disappointed. His work took him across Michigan, giving him a broader view of the state's economy and the role technology was beginning to play in it. Everywhere he went, he saw the same thing. Those who embraced machines thrived, while those who clung to old methods struggled to keep up. By the end of the 1880s, Henry was no longer just a farm boy with an interest in machines. He was a trained engineer, respected in his field, and quietly nurturing an idea that would one day change the world. The road from Springwells Township to Detroit had been long and challenging, but it had shaped him into the man who would take the next great leap, from repairing machines to building the future. In 1891, Henry Ford's path took a decisive turn when he was hired as an engineer for the Edison Illuminating Company in Detroit. This was not just another job. It was an entry into a world of cutting-edge electrical technology at a time when electricity itself was still a marvel to most Americans. Ford's role was to maintain the company's power plants, ensuring that Detroit's growing street lighting system and industrial customers had a reliable source of power. The work was complex and often demanding, requiring quick thinking and technical precision. For the first time, Ford was in a position that allowed him to study large-scale engineering systems, an experience that broadened his mechanical understanding beyond small workshop, tools, and farm machinery. The Edison Illuminating Company valued initiative, and Ford's curiosity was immediately evident. He didn't simply fix problems, he analyzed them, finding ways to prevent them from recurring. His colleagues noticed that he often stayed after hours, not because he was required to, but because he was driven to understand every machine in detail. The mechanical discipline he had learned on the farm and in machine shops now met the high standards of a growing city's infrastructure. This was the perfect training ground for the kind of precision and dependability he would later demand from his own factories. Working for Edison gave Ford financial stability, and more importantly, time to pursue his own mechanical experiments. His schedule allowed for long, uninterrupted evenings, where he could work in his home workshop, a modest space that became the birthplace of his first gasoline engines. Here, away from the noise of the city, he sketched designs, tested concepts, and carefully documented his progress. The combination of a secure job and creative freedom set the stage for his first major breakthroughs. The role also exposed Ford to a network of ambitious and inventive people. At Edison, engineers, machinists, and innovators frequently exchanged ideas, and Ford absorbed everything he could from them. He began reading extensively about the internal combustion engine, a technology in its infancy, but already showing promise in Europe. Unlike steam engines, which were large and heavy, these new gasoline engines could be compact and powerful, a perfect match for Ford's vision of a self-propelled vehicle. By the early 1890s, Ford was deeply committed to building his own gasoline engine. The knowledge and skills he was gaining at Edison were directly influencing his designs. He knew it would take time, patience, and experimentation to create something reliable, but he was determined. The Edison Illuminating Company was more than just a place of employment. It was the launchpad for Henry Ford's transformation from skilled mechanic to visionary inventor. In 1896, Ford's professional and personal worlds converged at a company dinner that would prove to be one of the most important moments of his life. The event was hosted by the Edison Illuminating Company, and its guest of honor was none other than Thomas Edison himself, the most famous inventor in America. Ford, then still an engineer with a modest reputation, was eager to meet the man whose name was synonymous with innovation. He had been working quietly on his own gasoline-powered vehicle and hoped to share his ideas with someone who could understand their potential. When the opportunity came, Ford presented his concept to Edison, explaining the advantages of a gasoline-powered car over steam or electric models. Edison listened carefully, nodding as Ford described the lightweight design and potential for mass adoption. Finally, Edison leaned forward, struck the table with his fist, and said, "Young man, that's the thing. Keep at it." For Ford, these words were more than encouragement. They were validation from a man whose opinion carried immense weight. The encounter left Ford energized. To have his ideas recognized and supported by Edison himself was a turning point in his confidence. He returned to his workshop with renewed determination, convinced that his vision was not only possible, but worth pursuing at full speed. Edison's endorsement would become a story Ford told for the rest of his life, a reminder that even the boldest ideas could find allies in unexpected places. This meeting also expanded Ford's understanding of what it meant to be an innovator. Edison was not just an inventor, he was a businessman, a promoter, and a strategist. Ford began to think not only about the engineering of his vehicle, but also about how to bring it to market. He saw that invention alone was not enough. Success would require a complete system for production, distribution, and public adoption. From that night forward, Ford worked with a clearer sense of purpose. The gasoline engine was no longer just an interesting project. It was the key to a new kind of transportation, one that could change how people lived and worked. The words of Thomas Edison had transformed Ford's private ambition into a mission. By the spring of 1896, Ford had completed his first self-propelled vehicle, which he called the Quadricycle. The name came from its simple frame and 4 bicycle wheels, which supported a lightweight body powered by a small 2-cylinder gasoline engine. It had 2 forward gears, but no reverse, and it could reach a top speed of about 20 miles per hour, a remarkable achievement for the time. The Quadricycle was built from a combination of handcrafted parts and whatever components Ford could repurpose, including bicycle tires, metal tubing, and a crude ignition system. The first test run took place in early June 1896. There was just one problem. The Quadricycle was too wide to fit through the doors of Ford's workshop. Laughing at the obstacle, Ford grabbed an axe and widened the doorway until the vehicle could be rolled out. This small moment captured the spirit of his approach: practical, direct, and unwilling to be stopped by small setbacks. Once on the streets of Detroit, the quadricycle ran smoothly, drawing curious looks from pedestrians and horse-drawn carriage drivers alike. Ford's initial trials revealed both strengths and weaknesses. The vehicle was easy to operate and surprisingly reliable over short distances, but it lacked the durability and power needed for everyday use. Still, the success of the test runs proved to Ford, and to those who witnessed them, that a gasoline-powered automobile could work in a real urban environment. It was a milestone in his journey from mechanic to automaker. News of the quadricycle spread quickly among Detroit's small but growing community of engineers and investors. Ford began receiving invitations to demonstrate the vehicle, and each showing brought him into contact with potential backers. These opportunities reinforced his belief that the future of transportation was not in steam or electricity, but in gasoline engines, which could be made smaller, lighter, and more affordable. The quadricycle itself would undergo several modifications as Ford refined his ideas. It was never intended as a commercial product, but rather as a proof of concept. In building it, Ford had demonstrated not just mechanical skill, but also the determination to see a project through from idea to reality. It was the first tangible step toward the automotive revolution he envisioned. Encouraged by the quadricycle's reception, Ford began seeking financial backers to start manufacturing vehicles on a larger scale. In 1899, he co-founded the Detroit Automobile Company with the support of local businessmen, including William H. Murphy, a prominent Detroit lumber magnate. The company's goal was to produce reliable automobiles for the public, but from the start it faced challenges. Manufacturing automobiles in 1899 was slow, expensive, and plagued by inconsistencies in parts and assembly. Ford, as chief engineer, focused on refining designs and improving performance, but his commitment to perfecting the vehicle often clashed with investors' desire to start selling cars quickly. The result was a small number of vehicles that were costly to build and priced far beyond what most Americans could afford. Sales were disappointing, and customer feedback revealed that the cars were too heavy and too complicated for practical use. Tensions grew between Ford and his financial partners. The investors wanted to recoup their money, while Ford wanted more time to experiment and improve the designs. This fundamental disagreement slowed production and drained resources. The company's inability to produce affordable, reliable cars eventually led to its collapse in 1901. Less than 2 years after it began operations. For Ford, the failure was a painful but necessary education. He learned that building a good car was only part of the challenge. Building it at a price the average person could pay was equally important. The Detroit Automobile Company had taught him that efficiency in manufacturing was as critical as innovation in design. This lesson would become the cornerstone of his future success. Although the company folded, Ford emerged from the experience with valuable connections, a deeper understanding of the automotive market, and an even stronger determination to succeed. He had failed, but he had failed forward, carrying with him the insights that would shape his next venture. The collapse of the Detroit Automobile Company could have ended Ford's automotive ambitions, but instead it sharpened his vision. He now understood that to truly revolutionize transportation, he would need to design a vehicle that was not only reliable and efficient, but also affordable for the average American. This meant rethinking every step of the process, from engineering to production. Ford realized that without a radical change in manufacturing methods, cars would remain luxury items for the wealthy. One of the key lessons he took away was the importance of controlling costs without sacrificing quality. He began studying manufacturing techniques in other industries, searching for ways to speed up production and reduce waste. The idea of a moving assembly line was still years away, but the seeds were already planted in his mind. He also recognized the value of standardizing parts so that each vehicle could be built more quickly and repaired more easily. Ford also reflected on the kind of company he wanted to build. He envisioned a workplace where skilled workers could earn a decent wage, where innovation was encouraged, and where the focus was on serving the needs of ordinary people. This contrasted sharply with the short-term profit-driven mindset he had encountered at the Detroit Automobile Company. For Ford, the long game was about changing the world, not just turning a quick profit. In the months following the company's closure, Ford went back to building and testing new prototypes. He participated in automobile races, both to prove the performance of his designs and to attract the attention of investors. These races gave him valuable publicity and helped restore his reputation as a serious engineer. Each new prototype brought him closer to the balance of performance, durability, and cost that he was seeking. By 1902, Ford was ready for his next venture, armed with hard-won experience and a clearer strategy. The failures of the past decade had taught him what didn't work and pointed him toward what might. The stage was set for the founding of the Ford Motor Company in 1903, and with it, the beginning of an automotive revolution. On June 16, 1903, Henry Ford officially founded the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, Michigan. The company was launched with an initial investment of $28,000 from 12 stockholders, a group that included wealthy lumber baron William H. Murphy and the Dodge brothers, John and Horace, who supplied critical parts. Ford, holding a modest stake himself, served as vice president and chief engineer, focusing on vehicle design and engineering, while leaving day-to-day business decisions largely to others in the early months. The modest brick factory at Mack Avenue became the company's first production site, with a small team of skilled workers assembling cars largely by hand. Ford's goal from the start was clear: produce a car that ordinary people could afford while maintaining quality and dependability. From the beginning, Ford faced a delicate balancing act. His backers wanted profits, but he wanted time to perfect the designs. Investors were eager to see cars rolling out and money coming in, but Ford insisted that building a reliable vehicle mattered more than rushing products to market. The Dodge brothers, acting as suppliers, delivered parts to Ford's specifications, which were often stricter than industry norms. This sometimes slowed production, but laid the groundwork for a reputation of durability. It also forged a working relationship between Ford and the Dodges that would influence the company's trajectory in its early years. The launch of the Ford Motor Company came at a time when the automobile industry was still finding its identity. Cars were considered luxury items, accessible only to the wealthy. Roads were primitive, and public skepticism about automobiles was common. Ford's vision, to make the car a practical tool for the average family, stood in sharp contrast to most competitors, who were focused on prestige and performance. He saw a massive untapped market in farmers, tradesmen, and small-town professionals, who could benefit from reliable transportation. The first months of operation were cautious but promising. Each car was built to order, with customers sometimes waiting weeks for delivery. Ford personally inspected each vehicle before it left the shop, ensuring it met his standards. The Mack Avenue plant was modest and cramped, but the team's focus on craftsmanship over quantity quickly earned them attention in Detroit's small but growing auto community. Every completed sale was a step toward proving that Ford's idea of an affordable, well-built automobile was not just a dream. The early financial pressures were real. Investors expected returns, and Ford knew he had to move from vision to volume if the company was going to survive. Yet he refused to compromise on the engineering principles that defined his work. This determination would prove essential in shaping the company's reputation and set the tone for the decade to come. Ford was not simply building cars. He was building the foundation for a transportation revolution. The first production car from the Ford Motor Company was the Model A, introduced in 1903. It was a simple, two-seat runabout, powered by a two-cylinder engine capable of about 8 horsepower, with a top speed of around 30 miles per hour. Priced at $850, it was still expensive for many Americans, but significantly more affordable than most competitors' offerings. The Model A was well received for its reliability and straightforward design, and the first one was sold to a Chicago dentist named Dr. Ernst Fenning. This early sale symbolized Ford's intent to appeal to practical buyers, not just the wealthy elite. In the following years, Ford introduced a series of models, B, C, F, K, N, R, and S, each reflecting experimentation and refinement. The Model B was larger and more expensive, while the Model C was smaller and lighter. The six-cylinder Model K was intended to appeal to the luxury market, but it was expensive to build and sold poorly. Ford quickly realized that chasing the high-end market was a distraction from his core vision. His most successful pre-Model T vehicles were the Model N, R, and S, which were lighter, simpler, and cheaper to produce. The Model N, launched in 1906, was a turning point. At $500, it was one of the cheapest cars available in the United States, and it quickly became a top seller. It featured a four-cylinder engine, a planetary transmission, and a simple, open-body design. This car proved that there was enormous demand for a reliable, low-cost automobile. The N's success encouraged Ford to focus on refining this concept, rather than chasing luxury markets. During these years, the company's reputation for solid engineering grew steadily. Customers appreciated that Ford vehicles were easy to operate and maintain, which made them appealing to people with little or no experience with automobiles. Word of mouth was powerful. Satisfied owners became some of Ford's best marketers. Every mile driven by a Ford on dusty rural roads was a rolling advertisement for the brand. However, these early successes were still limited by production constraints. Cars were assembled largely by hand, and output was relatively low. Ford knew that to truly achieve his goal of affordable mass ownership, he needed not only the right vehicle design, but also a radically different way to build it. The lessons learned from the early models would shape the most important car of his career. On October 1st, 1908, the Ford Motor Company introduced the Model T, the car that would change not just the company's future, but the entire automobile industry. Nicknamed the Tin Lizzie, the Model T was designed with a singular philosophy. It had to be durable, simple to operate, easy to repair, and affordable for the average American. Its 20 horsepower four-cylinder engine could reach speeds of 40 to 45 miles per hour, fast enough for the rough roads of the time. The car's high ground clearance allowed it to navigate muddy rural roads, while its lightweight vanadium steel construction made it strong without being heavy. Ford insisted that the Model T be designed for real-world conditions. He understood that many buyers would be farmers or rural workers, far from repair shops. The car was built so owners could handle basic maintenance themselves with simple tools. The transmission used a planetary gear system, which was easier for beginners to learn compared to the complex gear shifting of other cars. The car's parts were standardized and interchangeable, which not only simplified repairs, but also laid the groundwork for faster production. At launch, the Model T was priced at $850, similar to the Model A's debut price, but Ford immediately began looking for ways to reduce costs. The plan was to continually improve manufacturing efficiency so the price could be lowered without sacrificing quality. This strategy was the opposite of most automakers, who raised prices as demand grew. Ford believed that by making the car affordable to more people, sales volume would increase enough to cover the lower profit per unit. The Model T's design process had been deliberate and methodical. Ford and his team tested prototypes extensively on rough Michigan roads, and even in fields, ensuring that the car could withstand real-world abuse. The vanadium steel used in the chassis was a breakthrough, offering strength without adding weight. Everything about the car reflected Ford's obsession with practicality and cost-effectiveness. By the end of its first year, the Model T was already proving popular, with thousands sold. It wasn't just another car, it was a machine built for the masses. For the first time, the dream of personal transportation for ordinary Americans was becoming a reality. The Model T quickly earned a reputation as America's car. Its appeal crossed class lines, selling to farmers, small business owners, and city workers alike. In rural areas, it replaced horses and wagons, making trips to town faster and more efficient. In cities, it offered independence from streetcar schedules and gave families the freedom to travel beyond their neighborhoods. The car's adaptability was key. Owners could modify it to serve as a delivery truck, a tractor, or even a stationary power source for running machinery. Word spread quickly through newspapers, magazines, and, most importantly, word of mouth. Ford owners became passionate advocates, telling friends and neighbors about the car's reliability and ease of maintenance. For many first-time buyers, the Model T was their introduction to motorized transport, and it left a lasting impression. In an era when automobiles were still new to much of the population, this positive buzz was invaluable. Sales grew rapidly, year after year. By 1910, Ford had become the largest automobile manufacturer in the United States, producing more cars than many competitors combined. The affordability of the Model T attracted people who had never considered owning a car before. The fact that it could be driven, repaired, and maintained by the average person made it unlike anything else on the market. The Model T also became a cultural symbol of progress. It represented freedom, mobility, and the breaking down of geographic isolation. For rural families, it meant quicker access to markets, schools, and medical care. For city dwellers, it meant weekend trips into the countryside and the ability to live farther from work. The car was reshaping both daily life and the physical layout of communities. By the early 1910s, the Model T was not just a product, it was part of the American identity. People didn't just buy it for transportation, they bought it for what it represented. And as sales soared, so did the pressure on Ford to keep up with demand. The overwhelming popularity of the Model T brought a new set of challenges. Orders were coming in faster than the company could fill them, and production bottlenecks became a constant problem. The Mack Avenue plant, and later the larger Paquette Avenue plant, operated at full capacity. But cars were still assembled by hand in a slow, labor-intensive process. Delivery times stretched, and Ford knew that unless he could dramatically increase output, competitors might seize the opportunity to catch up. Ford's response was to focus relentlessly on efficiency. He began studying manufacturing methods in other industries, searching for ways to speed up production without sacrificing quality. He also pushed for greater standardization of parts so that assembly could be simplified. The goal was to build more cars in less time and at a lower cost, making the Model T affordable to an even wider audience. Internally, the pressure was intense. Workers were pushed to meet production targets, and the company experimented with reorganizing workstations to save time. Ford understood that these efforts were only the beginning. What he needed was a revolutionary approach to manufacturing itself. Though the moving assembly line had not yet been implemented, the ideas that would lead to it were already taking shape in his mind. The demand also highlighted the importance of maintaining quality control. Ford personally inspected cars and demanded that defects be addressed immediately. His insistence on high standards kept customer satisfaction high, even as the pace of production increased. This attention to quality would prove critical in maintaining the Model T's reputation through years of mass production. By 1913, the Ford Motor Company was producing tens of thousands of Model Ts annually, but Henry Ford knew the system still had a room for improvement. The challenge of meeting demand was driving innovation within the company at a pace never seen before. The stage was set for the next great leap in manufacturing, a leap that would not only change Ford's business, but would transform industry worldwide. In 1913, the Ford Motor Company introduced a manufacturing change that would transform not only the automobile industry, but industrial production across the world. The moving assembly line, first implemented at the Highland Park plant in Michigan, was designed to bring work to the worker instead of having workers move from one station to another. This meant that a chassis could move along a conveyor, while each worker performed a specific, repeated task. It was a bold idea inspired by practices in other industries, such as meatpacking and watchmaking. but Ford's team adapted it for large-scale automobile production. The results were immediate and staggering. Production time for a single Model T dropped from over 12 hours to just about 90 minutes. The new system allowed the company to dramatically increase output without proportionally increasing labor costs. Instead of skilled craftsmen assembling entire cars, workers specialized in one or two tasks, which they could perform quickly and consistently. This specialization meant less training time, less room for error, and a more predictable workflow. Henry Ford understood that efficiency was the key to making the Model T affordable for more people, and the assembly line was the breakthrough that made it possible. By the end of the first year, Ford's production numbers had surged, outpacing every competitor. However, the efficiency gains came with trade-offs. The work was repetitive and physically demanding, often leading to boredom and fatigue among workers. The speed of the line left little room for rest or error, and some employees struggled with the relentless pace. Turnover rates were high, with workers quitting in large numbers. Ford recognized that while the assembly line solved the problem of production speed, it created new challenges in maintaining a stable, motivated workforce. Despite these issues, the moving assembly line became a symbol of modern industrial power. Factories in other industries began to study and replicate Ford's methods, seeing them as the future of manufacturing. The concept was not just about building cars. It was about rethinking how goods of all kinds could be produced efficiently. The world took notice, and Fordism became a term used to describe the combination of mass production and mass consumption. By reducing costs so dramatically, Ford could lower the price of the Model T year after year, expanding its customer base and reinforcing his goal of making the car a tool for ordinary Americans. The moving assembly line had turned Ford Motor Company into the largest automobile manufacturer in the world, and the model was being studied by industries from shipbuilding to consumer electronics. The age of industrial mass production had arrived, and Henry Ford was at its center. On January 5, 1914, Henry Ford shocked the business world by announcing that the company would more than double the average worker's daily wage to $5. At the time, the typical industrial wage was about $2.34 per day, so the jump was unprecedented. Ford also reduced the workday from 9 hours to 8, making it possible to run 3 shifts instead of 2. This was not just a wage increase, it was a strategic move to attract and keep the best workers in an industry plagued by high turnover. The announcement made headlines worldwide, with both praise and criticism from other industrialists. Ford's motives were both practical and philosophical. The assembly line's pace was causing high employee burnout, and the company was losing money on constant recruitment and training. By offering higher pay, Ford hoped to stabilize his workforce and maintain production levels. At the same time, he believed that well-paid workers could afford the products they made, fueling a cycle of mass production and mass consumption. It was a radical approach to business that challenged conventional thinking. The impact was immediate. Thousands of job seekers flooded Detroit, hoping to work at the Highland Park plant. The $5 workday became a powerful recruitment tool, allowing Ford to select the most capable and disciplined workers. Productivity improved, absenteeism dropped, and the company's public image soared. Workers were not only earning more, but also had more leisure time, which in turn stimulated other sectors of the economy. Critics accused Ford of upsetting labor markets and undermining the wage structures of other industries. Some business leaders called the policy reckless and unsustainable, predicting that it would bankrupt the company. But Ford's gamble paid off. Profits increased as efficiency rose and the workforce stabilized. Other companies, seeing Ford's success, began to reconsider their own labor policies. The $5 workday also had a cultural impact. It reinforced Ford's image as a visionary who cared about the everyday worker, even if his motives were partly self-serving. For many Americans, it was proof that industrial progress did not have to come at the expense of fair wages and working conditions. The move cemented Ford's reputation as both a master businessman and a social innovator, a rare combination in the early 20th century. By the mid-1910s, the Ford Motor Company was no longer just an American success story. It was becoming a global brand. Ford recognized that to dominate the automobile industry, he needed to produce and sell cars, not only in the United States, but around the world. The first step was to establish a network of dealerships across North America, ensuring that customers in small towns and rural areas had access to sales and service. This strategy extended the reach of the Model T far beyond major cities. The company soon began building assembly plants in other countries. In 1911, Ford opened his first overseas plant in Manchester, England, followed by facilities in Canada, Argentina, and later in Europe, Asia, and Australia. These plants allowed Ford to avoid high import tariffs and adapt cars to local conditions, such as driving on the left side of the road in the United Kingdom. Producing cars closer to the customer base also reduced shipping costs and delivery times. Ford's international strategy was built on the same principles that had worked in the United States: affordability, durability, and ease of repair. In many countries, the Model T became the first car people had ever owned. It was used for farming, hauling goods, and personal travel, transforming local economies and daily life. The car's adaptability was one of its greatest strengths. It could be modified to serve as a taxi, ambulance, or even a motorized boat in some places. The global expansion of the Ford brand also brought cultural influence. The sight of a Model T on the streets of Buenos Aires, Sydney, or London was a visible sign of American industrial power. Ford became a household name across continents, and his methods were studied by entrepreneurs and governments alike. The spread of Ford's assembly line techniques even influenced industries unrelated to automobiles. By the 1920s, Ford Motor Company was producing cars on 6 continents, and its name was synonymous with innovation and reliability. The success of this global reach reinforced Henry Ford's belief that his mission was not just to sell cars, but to reshape how people everywhere moved, worked, and lived. In doing so, he had turned his company into one of the first truly multinational corporations. When World War I broke out in Europe in 1914, Henry Ford took a public stance that surprised many. He opposed U.S. involvement in the war. A committed pacifist at the time, Ford believed that war was both morally wrong and economically wasteful. He argued that industry should focus on improving life, not destroying it. In 1915, he took his opposition to a dramatic level by sponsoring what became known as the Peace Ship mission. The idea was to send a delegation of peace activists, journalists, and prominent figures aboard a chartered ocean liner, the Oscar II, to Europe in hopes of mediating an end to the conflict. Ford personally funded the venture, envisioning himself as a facilitator of peace talks between warring nations. The mission attracted global media attention, but also widespread skepticism. Critics called it naive and unrealistic, and the press often mocked Ford's idealism. The trip quickly encountered problems. Illness broke out among the passengers, and disagreements erupted among the peace delegates. European leaders showed little interest in meeting with the group, and the mission failed to produce any diplomatic breakthroughs. Ford himself left the trip early, disheartened by the internal conflicts and negative publicity. Despite its failure, the Peace Ship episode revealed a side of Ford's personality that was both visionary and impractical. He truly believed that individuals could influence world events if they acted with enough determination. Yet the experience also showed the limits of idealism when confronted with complex geopolitical realities. The ridicule he faced afterward made him more cautious about public political involvement. Ford's pacifist stance softened when the United States entered the war in 1917. The company became a major supplier of military vehicles, aircraft, engines, and equipment, contributing significantly to the war effort. The shift from peace advocacy to wartime production reflected Ford's pragmatic understanding of business survival and national duty. Even so, The peace ship remained one of the most unusual chapters in his life, remembered as much for its ambition as for its failure. By the early 1920s, the Model T had been on the market for over a decade, and while it remained the best-selling car in the world, consumer tastes were beginning to change. Competitors were offering vehicles with more style, comfort, and features, often at prices that matched or undercut Ford's. The Model T, once revolutionary, was starting to look outdated. Buyers wanted more color options, improved interiors, and modern conveniences like electric starters. Henry Ford resisted major changes to the Model T, believing that its simplicity and low cost were its greatest strengths. He famously said, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants so long as it is black," a decision based on the fast-drying paint that kept assembly lines moving. While this strategy had once been an advantage, it now made the car seem monotonous compared to the variety offered by competitors. Sales began to plateau, and in some markets, they declined. Ford's focus on efficiency had allowed him to dominate for years, but now it left the company slow to adapt to shifting consumer expectations. His reluctance to redesign the Model T gave rivals like General Motors an opening to capture market share with vehicles that emphasized both performance and style. Internally, there were debates among Ford executives about the need for a new model. Some urged modernization, pointing to market research and sales data, but Ford remained stubborn. He believed that lowering the price even further would revive demand. While prices did drop to as low as $260 by the mid-1920s, the appeal of the car was no longer just about affordability. People wanted more than basic transportation. By 1927, the writing was on the wall. Ford finally decided to halt production of the Model T after selling over 15 million units. The decision marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter for the company. The challenge ahead would be to design a successor that could recapture the public's imagination while competing in a more sophisticated and crowded marketplace. By 1927, after 2 decades of the Model T's dominance, Henry Ford was faced with a growing problem. The Model T, once revolutionary, had reached the end of its life cycle. It had become outdated and consumer demand was shifting. Ford had resisted change for years, but he could no longer ignore the fact that his car was no longer meeting the needs of the market. He had built a successful empire on the Model T, but the world was moving on and Ford was forced to follow. In December 1927, Ford unveiled the Model A car that would reignite the company's sales. Unlike the Model T, the Model A came in several body styles, including a sedan, coupe, and roadster. It offered more options for color and trim, addressing a consumer desire for variety. The car's design was more modern, with a smoother, sleeker appearance that appealed to the growing middle class. Ford's engineers worked tirelessly to create a car that would meet the standards of a new generation of buyers. The Model A was also a technological advancement. It featured a more powerful engine, offering 40 horsepower and a more refined braking system. The car was easy to drive, with a 4-speed transmission that allowed for smoother shifting. It was an improvement over the Model T in nearly every way, from performance to comfort. With a price tag of around $385, it was affordable for most families, a central goal for Ford throughout his career. The response to the Model A was overwhelmingly positive. Ford sold over 630,000 units in the first year, and the company quickly became the largest automobile manufacturer in the world. People flocked to Ford dealerships, eager to get their hands on the new car. The Model A's success proved that Ford could still reinvent himself and the company, even after nearly 2 decades of the same vehicle. However, the success of the Model A was not without challenges. Competition was fierce, with General Motors and Chrysler introducing their own affordable and stylish cars. Ford had to find ways to maintain his lead while staying true to his principles of affordability and simplicity. The company was now in a race to meet rising demand while maintaining the quality and cost-effectiveness that had made Ford a household name. The next few years would be critical in ensuring Ford's continued dominance in the automotive industry. Despite the challenges, the Model A marked a turning point for Ford Motor Company. It demonstrated Ford's ability to adapt to the changing market, while still maintaining his commitment to the mass production of affordable automobiles. The success of the Model A set the stage for future innovations, including the eventual development of the Ford V8, which would cement Ford's place in history. The company's success, however, would be tested again as the world faced the tumultuous years of the Great Depression and World War II. The onset of the Great Depression in 1929 changed the landscape for Ford Motor Company and the entire auto industry. The financial collapse shattered consumer confidence, and by 1930, Ford's sales had plummeted. For the first time in Ford's career, the company was forced to make significant cuts. Layoffs were inevitable, and many of the workers who had once been offered the $5 workday were now out of a job. Ford, always one to resist change, found himself facing pressures he had never encountered before. Amidst the economic chaos, Ford struggled to maintain his workers' loyalty. The company's aggressive labor policies, coupled with the refusal to recognize unions, led to mounting tensions. Ford's hardline stance on labor created an environment of distrust between management and workers. Labor unrest came to a head in 1937, during the Battle of the Overpass, when union organizers were brutally beaten by Ford security personnel while trying to distribute leaflets outside the company's River Rouge plant. The incident made national headlines, and Ford's reputation was severely damaged. Ford's resistance to unions stemmed from his belief that he could maintain control of his workers without the need for external influences. He had been a strong advocate for paternalistic policies, offering higher wages, stable employment, and even housing. Yet, these measures were not enough to placate workers who sought more power in the workplace. The battle for recognition by the United Auto Workers, UAW, would intensify as the Depression wore on, with Ford continuing to reject their demands. However, Ford's approach to labor was not without consequence. The violence during the Battle of the Overpass led to public outcry and legal action against the company. Despite his staunch resistance, Ford was eventually forced to concede and recognize the Union in 1941, after years of conflict. The recognition came too late for many workers, who had already faced years of mistreatment. Ford's failure to adapt sooner cost him valuable goodwill and set the stage for labor negotiations that would continue throughout his career. While the Depression and labor unrest took a toll on Ford's personal and professional life, they also taught him valuable lessons. He realized that the system he had built, based on personal control and paternalism, was increasingly out of step with the demands of a modern workforce. This realization would shape his leadership and influence how the company adapted to the changing industrial landscape. The Great Depression also left Ford with a more cautious and reflective outlook on business. While the company survived, it was clear that Ford's focus on innovation and efficiency had to be paired with a more responsive and flexible approach to labor relations. The years that followed would bring further trials and triumphs, but the lessons of the Depression era would resonate deeply within Ford Motor Company. One of the darkest chapters in Henry Ford's life was his involvement with anti-Semitic publications. In 1920, Ford began publishing a series of articles in the Dearborn Independent, a newspaper he owned. These articles, which later became compiled into a book titled The International Jew, promoted hateful stereotypes about Jewish people. Ford's paper claimed that Jews controlled international banking, the media, and even had a hand in instigating World War I. The publication of these views would spark outrage both in the United States and abroad, particularly among Jewish organizations. At the time, Ford was one of the most influential men in America, and his opinions carried weight. His anti-Semitic views were not just personal beliefs, but public statements with far-reaching consequences. Jewish advocacy groups, including the Anti-Defamation League, led a fierce campaign against Ford, condemning him for spreading hate. The publication of The International Jew fueled anti-Jewish sentiment in some parts of America, and even in Nazi Germany, where Hitler admired Ford's writings and later used them in his own propaganda. The controversy surrounding Ford's publications reached its peak when the company began to face boycotts and protests. Several Ford dealerships were targeted, and public figures questioned Ford's moral character. Despite the backlash, Ford refused to retract the articles, believing they were part of his broader mission to improve American society. This stance only increased the animosity toward him, and it became difficult for the company to maintain its image as a progressive force in American industry. In 1927, after significant public pressure, Ford issued a public apology, stating that he had been misled and had not fully understood the impact of his publications. He claimed that he had no personal animosity toward Jewish people, and that the articles had been written without his direct oversight. While this apology helped to calm some of the immediate fallout, the damage to Ford's reputation was irreparable. Many viewed the apology as insincere, and the public remained skeptical of his true feelings. The affair left an indelible stain on Ford's legacy. His anti-Semitic views and the publication of the International Jew were seen by many as a sign that even a great businessman could harbor prejudices that were harmful to society. This episode continues to be one of the most controversial aspects of his life, overshadowing many of his accomplishments. While Ford later distanced himself from the articles and expressed regret, the incident marked a turning point in his career. It revealed the limits of his moral authority and illustrated how even the most visionary industrialists could falter when it came to social responsibility. Despite his significant achievements in manufacturing, Ford's legacy would forever be tainted by this chapter. When World War II broke out in 1939, Henry Ford's views on international conflict had evolved. Initially, Ford, like many in the United States, favored isolationism. He had long believed that America should stay out of European wars, a position he had maintained during World War I as well. However, the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 forced Ford to reconsider his stance. The United States entered the war, and Ford's factories quickly pivoted to meet the nation's military needs. Ford's company played a critical role in the war effort. The Willow Run bomber plant, located in Michigan, became a symbol of Ford's ingenuity. Built in record time, the plant used the same mass production techniques that had revolutionized automobile manufacturing. Its primary product was the B-24 Liberator bomber, a long-range aircraft that could carry heavy bomb loads. The plant's assembly lines turned out one bomber every 63 minutes, a staggering achievement that highlighted Ford's ability to adapt his methods to wartime production. Ford also produced tanks, military vehicles, and aircraft engines for the Allied forces. In total, the company manufactured thousands of vehicles and millions of parts for the war effort. Ford's contribution to the war effort helped cement his place as an industrial hero, despite his earlier reluctance to become involved in global conflicts. His factory workers, many of whom were women and minorities, worked tirelessly to meet production goals. Ford's involvement in the war effort was not without controversy. Early in the conflict, his pacifist tendencies made him hesitant to fully commit to the war. However, his company's role in producing military vehicles and supplies quickly solidified his position as a key player in the industrial side of the war. Though his personal views on war had shifted, his company's performance during the conflict would prove to be one of its most important chapters. By the end of the war, Ford Motor Company had emerged as a leading force in American industrial production. The company's wartime contributions not only helped win the war, but also reinforced the belief that Ford's mass production methods could be applied to virtually any industry. The success of the Willow Run plant marked the pinnacle of Ford's industrial power. The death of Edsel Ford in 1943 marked the end of an era for Ford Motor Company. Edsel, who had served as company president for over 20 years, had been a stabilizing force during some of the company's most difficult times. His vision for the future of the company had been more progressive than his father's. and he had pushed Ford to modernize its products and labor policies. His sudden death from cancer left a gaping hole in Ford's leadership. Henry Ford, despite his age and health struggles, took over the company's presidency again. His return to leadership came at a critical moment. The company was transitioning from war production back to consumer goods, and new models were being developed for the post-war market. Ford, in his 80s, struggled with the physical and mental demands of the job. He relied on his son's advisors and executives to handle the day-to-day operations, but his influence remained strong. In 1945, Henry Ford officially handed over control of the company to his grandson, Henry Ford II. The younger Ford had proven himself capable and well prepared for leadership, having been groomed for the role by his father. Under Henry Ford II's leadership, the company began to modernize and adapt to the new consumer-driven post-war economy. Henry Ford's health continued to decline, and he spent his final years out of the public eye. On April 7, 1947, Henry Ford passed away at the age of 83. His death marked the end of a chapter in American industry. Ford's legacy was cemented in the history of mass production, labor relations, and the global spread of American capitalism. He left behind a company that would continue to thrive under the leadership of his grandson. At the time of his death, Ford's wealth was estimated at around $200 million, most of which was directed to the Ford Foundation. His passing marked the end of an era in American business, but his impact on manufacturing, labor, and industry would continue for generations to come.